Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're stepping right into the rowdy, smoky, and honestly, slightly sticky world of the medieval tavern. Think of it as the unsung heart of every town, the unofficial news center where a knight, a local farmer, and a traveling bard could all get equally drunk, and if they weren't careful, equally robbed. This wasn't just a spot to grab a drink. It was a chaotic melting pot where danger, laughter, and a fair share of medieval germs mingled freely beneath a leaky thatched roof. So before you get too cozy, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. But seriously, only if you're actually vibing with what I'm doing here. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. It's honestly so cool to see how far our little community reaches across the globe. Now, go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, rhythmic background hum, and let's just ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you've been trudging through a muddy street that smells like a questionable blend of horse manure, wood smoke, and some kind of mystery soup. It's raining, because of course it is. Or it just finished, meaning everything is slick, including your only pair of shoes. You're exhausted, your stomach is growling, and you've nearly been flattened by a cart full of turnips twice in the last 10 minutes. You desperately need a drink. But how do you even find a tavern in a medieval town? There are no neon signs, no Yelp reviews to check, and definitely no GPS to guide you. All you have are your ears. You just follow the noise. Somewhere past the heat of the blacksmith's forge and the fishmonger screaming about his fresh river eels, you hear it, a chorus of roaring laughter shouting, and someone aggressively singing a ballad about a goose. And there it is, a crooked wooden building leaning at such a weird angle, it looks like even the architecture has had one too many. Hanging above the door is a wooden sign, barely legible, with a crude painting of, well, is it a barrel? A bear? Maybe both? Either way, this is the place. Welcome to the tavern. The front step is slick with spilled ale, and as you push open that heavy, iron-hinged door, it lets out a creak so long and dramatic, it's practically its own form of entertainment. Instantly, a wave of warm air hits you. It's a thick perfume of wood smoke, wet wool, stale beer, and mystery meat that greets your face like a clumsy drunken handshake. You've finally made it. Inside, the ceiling is low enough to make tall men duck and drunk men constantly bump their heads. The floor is dirt. Not earthy-toned flooring, but literal dirt, though someone has scattered straw over it in a desperate attempt to pretend it's clean. Spoilers, it isn't. There are no private booths here, no waiters handing out menus, and absolutely no such thing as a quiet conversation. This is a medieval tavern, and it really only has two modes, incredibly rowdy or closed down because it caught on fire. You spot an open seat on a lopsided bench near the hearth, but it's damp with something you decide it's better not to ask about. A few feet away, someone is screaming about a stolen chicken. Someone else is totally passed out, still clutching a soup ladle like a prized possession. A one-eyed dog is gnawing on a bone under a table with the confidence of someone who actually pays rent. And this, my friend, is just the entrance. You've only just walked through the door, and it already smells like a night you're either going to remember forever or try very hard to forget. As that heavy tavern door slams shut behind you, the darkness doesn't just greet you. It wraps around your senses like a damp, heavy wool blanket. It's warm, deeply uncomfortable, and honestly, a little suspicious. Your eyes take a second to adjust, blinking against the flickering candlelight that dances off soot-stained walls. The shadows here are so wild and erratic they make the furniture look like it's about to stand up and pick a fight with you. In the far corner, the hearth is roaring away, pulling double duty as the only source of heat and a massive open flame hazard. Smoke drifts lazily through the room, never quite finding its way out of a chimney that you're convinced might be stuffed with a dead crow. But honestly, it's not the noise or the heat that hits you first. It's the smell. A medieval tavern scent isn't just an aroma, it's more like a form of emotional trauma. The top notes are definitely ale, warm, sour, and splashed liberally across every single surface. Beneath that, you've got sweat. We're talking years of it. Human, horse, and maybe something mythical. Throw in a hint of moldy bread, wet straw, and a lingering whisper of boiled onions, and you've got a fragrance blend that no modern perfumer would ever dare to bottle. The tables are carved with decades of initials, crude drawings, and deep knife scars, wobbling with a kind of stubborn pride. The benches creak and groan under the weight of muddy boots, thick cloaks, and some truly questionable life decisions. As promised, the floor is literal dirt, but it's layered with straw meant to soak up spills, spit, and the occasional unconscious customer. You have to step carefully here. One wrong move, and your foot sinks into something with a texture that's best left undescribed. The crowd itself is like a single living, breathing organism. In one corner, a roar of laughter erupts, while right next to them, two men are nearly coming to blows over the price of a pig. A woman slams her mug down hard enough to splash half her drink, and nobody, not a single soul, even flinches. At the next table, a man is staring at you with the dazed, glassy look of someone who is either deep in philosophical thought or has completely forgotten how chairs work. Someone nearby lets out a massive sneeze, and the entire left side of the room collectively leans away in a practiced wave. And yet, despite this absolute assault on your modern sensibilities, there's something strangely welcoming about it. The tavern is alive. It's rough, raw, and completely unfiltered. The medieval version of a community hub, just minus the hygiene, and with about 400% more shouting. You finally find a seat. It's a bit damp. It's almost certainly cursed. But for now, it's yours. At first glance, the layout looks like someone tried to arrange the furniture during a massive earthquake, and then just decided to leave it that way. There's no blueprint here, no designated bar area, and definitely no cozy quiet booths in the back. It's just a sprawling, uneven mess of tables, benches, barrels, and the occasional wooden crate being passed off as a chair. Everything is either way too close together or miles apart, depending on exactly how drunk you are. The hearth is the only real centerpiece, a giant open fire roaring against the wall, doing its absolute best to provide warmth, light, and a healthy dose of indoor smoke inhalation. People crowd around it for comfort like moths with beer mugs. If you've got a seat near the fire, you hog that warmth for dear life. If you don't, well, that's what the ale is for. The bar, if you can even call it that, is usually just a thick, sagging wooden plank resting across two barrels. It groans under the weight of jugs, mugs, and heavy elbows. Behind it stands the tavern keeper, a master of multitasking who can pour a drink, yell an order, and give a guy in the corner a "you still haven't paid for last Tuesday" death stare all at the same time. Don't bother looking for a menu. You just ask what's available and brace yourself. The answer is almost always ale, or shut up and wait. To your side, a narrow staircase, possibly original, definitely splintery, leads to the rooms upstairs. If you squint through the gloom, you might see a random boot hanging from one of the railing posts. No one is entirely sure if it's a decorative choice or a grim warning. Some taverns have a mysterious back room, too. It might be for storage. It might be for illegal gambling. Or it might be where the last person who insulted the barmaid was taken, never to be seen again. Honestly, it's best not to ask. The walls are permanently stained with candle soot, and the windows are covered with greasy cloth or animal hide instead of glass. Every single surface has been thoroughly polished by the elbows, boots, and spilled drinks of generations past. And maybe a chicken. Somehow, though, despite the chaos, or maybe because of it, it all just works. In this wild, disorganized mess, there's actually a rhythm to it. Everyone knows exactly where to go, when to shout, and, most importantly, when to duck. It's not organized by any modern standard, but it's undeniably alive. And you need to understand one thing. Every medieval tavern has a ruler. It's not the local lord sitting in his castle, and it's definitely not the tax collector. It's the tavern keeper. They might not wear a crown, but don't let that fool you. This person runs the entire show. They're equal parts chef, server, accountant, babysitter, and the sole executioner of barroom justice. The tavern keeper is a one-person institution who takes absolutely zero nonsense. If it's a man, he's probably built like a barrel with arms, grizzled, grumpy, and seemingly carved out of cured meat and bad decisions. If it's a woman, and honestly it often was, she's sharper than a blacksmith's file and can silence a room of rowdy mercenaries with nothing but a single look. Either way, they've seen everything, heard even worse, and have definitely cleaned blood out of the floor straw before breakfast. They greet the regulars with a short nod, strangers with a heavy dose of suspicion, and troublemakers with a swift tankard to the skull. Behind that makeshift bar, they're keeping mental tabs on who's paid, who's running a tab, and who's had 3 drinks too many. They do all of this without writing a single thing down, because while literacy might be rare, tavern memory is something truly terrifying. The keeper sets the entire vibe. If they're in a good mood, the place hums with energy. If they're having a bad day, you'd better drink fast, keep your head down, and save your jokes for another night. They're the referee for every argument, the judge for every gambling cheat, and the first person to grab a heavy wooden club when a brawl breaks out. You do not mess with the tavern keeper. They also happen to be the most informed person in town. Who's drowning in debt? Who's having a scandalous affair? Who just rolled into town using a fake name? If you need info, you bribe the barkeep. If you need protection, you sit as close to them as possible. If you need a favor, well, you better hope you didn't break a mug last week. Usually they've got a helper, a son, a daughter, or maybe an orphan they adopted, and now forced to carry barrels twice their body weight. These assistants are constantly blurring past, running drinks, mopping up spills, and trying their best not to get stepped on by a passing drunk. So while this place feels like pure chaos to you, it's actually a very delicate ecosystem. And right in the center, commanding it all like a storm god in a stained apron, stands the tavern keeper, the only thing keeping the ale flowing and the roof from collapsing into a full-blown riot. So you finally settle onto a creaky bench, dodging sharp elbows and splashes of stray stew. Your throat is parched, your boots are damp, and it's finally time for the main event, the drink. But look, don't go expecting a wine list or a polished glass. This is a medieval tavern, friend. Your choices are limited, lukewarm, and, depending on the day, potentially life-threatening. Let's start with the classic ale. It's unfiltered, unpasteurized, and usually brewed in a back room right where the dog sleeps. It's thick, cloudy, and often comes with floaties, bits of grain, yeast, or maybe a stray hair from the previous customer's mustache. It's not cold because ice is a luxury you don't have, and you definitely don't ask how long it's been sitting in that barrel. You just drink it and hope for the best. Next up is mead, or honey wine. Sounds fancy and romantic, right? In reality, it's incredibly sweet, deceptively strong, and occasionally explosive. If the keeper made it themselves, it might be delicious, or it might taste like pure regret and bee venom. It's usually reserved for nobles, wedding guests, or that one annoying bard who insists on being paid in gold. Then you've got cider, made from apples that were either freshly picked or had been rotting on the ground for 3 weeks. It's sharp, tangy, and served in cracked mugs that will probably double as soup bowls by morning. It's the go-to for anyone who wants to get just drunk enough to forget the smell of the guy sitting next to them. Wine? Technically, yes, it exists. But unless you're in southern Europe or there's a duke in town, it's probably watered down, turned sour, and served with a side of sarcasm. Good wine is for the bishops and the wealthy merchants. And as for water? That's a bold, dangerous choice. Half the time, it's teeming with invisible death. Boiling it costs precious fuel, and clean wells are hard to find. That's why even the kids drink small ale. It's not about getting a buzz. It's about not dying of dysentery before you hit age 8. There are no measured shots or craft cocktails here. You drink from mugs made of wood, clay, or tin, some of which might still have a bit of last night's stew stuck to the bottom. You raise your mug, give it a cautious sniff, and take a sip. It's warm, it's bitter, and somehow it's absolutely perfect. Look, in a medieval tavern, the rule of thumb is simple. If it's wet and it won't kill you on the first sip, it's basically a fine vintage. So you've survived the drink? Barely? Good. Because now your stomach is starting to growl, reminding you that you haven't eaten since sunrise, and your last meal was mostly just barley and a side of sadness. It's time to eat. But seriously, don't get your hopes up. There is no menu, no waiter to guide you through the specials, and absolutely no one is going to ask if you have dietary restrictions or allergies. In a place like this, you don't really order food. You just ask what's left in the pot and pray that it's served hot and is only vaguely mysterious. The undisputed star of the tavern table is the pottage. This is a thick, heavy stew made from whatever grains, vegetables, and questionable proteins happen to be lying around that day. It's been simmering in the exact same pot since Monday, and, checks notes, it's now Thursday. New ingredients are tossed in every morning, but nothing is ever truly removed. It's less of a meal and more of a culinary time capsule. If you find meat in your bowl, honestly, congratulations. It's probably rabbit, pigeon, or maybe just an unlucky chicken that wandered a little too close to the hearth. If it's game meat, it might be delicious, or it might be aged way past the point of reason and seasoned with pure desperation. Your bowl is made of wood or clay. And as for a spoon, you either brought your own or you're using your fingers. Most people carry their own knives, making every meal a bring-your-own-cutlery affair. And don't even look around for napkins. You've got 2 choices, the sleeve of your tunic or a shared rag that has seen things it will never, ever forget. Then there's the bread. It's tough, dark, and heavy. Honestly, it functions better as a blunt force weapon than a food group. If it's soft, it was baked today. If it's hard, it was baked last week and could probably break a tooth. Either way, it pairs perfectly with cheese that smells like a wet hiking boot and has started to develop its own personality. Sometimes there's salted fish. Sometimes there are pickled eggs. Occasionally the keeper will offer a special, which is really just a fancy way of saying, "We had too much of this stuff lying around, and it's starting to turn." The flavor is optional. The texture is unpredictable. Still, sitting there in the flickering firelight with the roar of the crowd around you and the warmth of the bowl in your hands, it's not half bad. It's filling. It's hot. And if you don't think too hard about what's currently floating in your stew, it might even feel comforting. You aren't here for fine dining. You're here to eat like a survivor. Once you've finally settled into a seat, ideally one without a knife sticking out of it, you start to notice the real entertainment, the people. A medieval tavern is basically the original social media feed. It's loud, chaotic, only about 50% true, and everyone is fully committed to oversharing. To your left, there's a red-faced farmer who's already 4 ales deep, retelling the same story about his cow giving birth sideways for the 5th time. He'll slap your shoulder mid-sentence, like you've been best friends for 20 years, mostly because you're a better listener than the pig he usually drinks with. Way down at the end of the room, a hooded stranger sits in the deepest shadows, nursing a drink at a glacial pace. He could be a runaway monk, a high-stakes bandit, or maybe he's just really, really bad at eye contact. Either way, you don't make small talk with him, unless you're looking to accidentally disappear behind the stables. Near the hearth, a soldier in battered, dented armor is regaling a small crowd with tales of glory. His story somehow involves dragons, Frenchmen, and a talking sword. It is 100% fake, but nobody cares. His tankard is being kept full, and his audience is howling with laughter. Meanwhile, a sweaty merchant is shouting out prices for grain that literally nobody asked for, pulling gold coins from his pouch like a man who is actively begging to be robbed before midnight. A pair of locals are locked in a game of dice on a warped table. Their expressions are deadly intense. One of them is clearly cheating, the other one knows it and is just letting it happen, probably saving the fight for when the ale runs out. In the corner, a bard strums a lute, his voice cracking on the high notes of a love song that sounds suspiciously like he's making it up as he goes. No one minds, though. He's wearing pants and he's mostly in tune, which makes him a massive upgrade over the guy from last night. Women weave through the crowd. Some are tavern staff, others are working their own side businesses. They are sharp-eyed, confident, and absolutely not to be trifled with. Depending on your tone, they'll either flirt with you, laugh at you, or knock your teeth down your throat. Children occasionally dart between people's legs, swiping leftover bread or a stray coin. No one stops them. It's just the rhythm of the room. Everyone is watching, drinking, plotting, and collectively pretending not to notice the man passed out under the table. This tavern isn't just a place to grab a snack and a beer. It's a living, breathing performance. And tonight, you're officially part of the cast. Forget the lutes and the romantic ballads for a second. The real soundtrack of a medieval tavern isn't a song. It's a symphony of pure chaos. It starts with a clink. Dozens of mugs slamming against wood in celebration, negotiation, or just a drunken misfire. Some clang cheerfully, others shatter into a million pieces. Both results are met with thunderous cheers. Then comes the laughter. Big, loud, deep-belly laughter that sounds like it escaped from a wild boar. Most of it makes no sense at all. A farmer is chuckling at his own joke about hay. A knight is giggling at the word pottage. A monk is wheezing uncontrollably every time someone mentions a duck. You learn very quickly. Don't ask why. Just laugh along. Voices here don't just talk. They layer over one another, each getting louder than the last, fighting for dominance like a bunch of roosters trapped in a coop. It's a chaotic web of arguing, storytelling, and aggressive shouting about taxes. You've got at least one person over in the corner definitely misquoting scripture just to win a petty bet. The bartender is constantly yelling out orders while swatting at flies with a practiced flick of the wrist. A barmaid is shouting down some guy who tried to get a little too friendly, and someone, God knows who, keeps chanting another round, like it's a sacred battle cry. And then there's the bard. He's got a half-tuned lute with 3 missing strings, playing the same 4 chords on an endless loop. He'll occasionally burst into verses about lost love, found chickens, or some local nobleman who accidentally wore his pants backward. Honestly, no one really pays attention to him unless he starts singing about someone actually sitting in the room. That's when things get either very entertaining or very dangerous. Suddenly, someone spills a drink. Someone else lets out a burp loud enough to make the wooden rafters tremble. A guy falls right off his bench, but he just keeps talking from the floor like it was a planned move. In the background, you hear dogs barking and, for some reason, a goat bleating. Why is there a goat? Nobody knows and nobody cares. Chairs scrape across the dirt floor like thunderclaps in a wooden cavern. It's not peaceful, but it's oddly rhythmic. Every now and then the whole room just goes quiet. Not because of some dramatic event, just a sudden random lull. It lasts exactly 3 seconds. Then someone farts heroically, the tension snaps, and the music starts right back up again. This isn't just background noise. This is the tavern's heartbeat. It's raw, it's rowdy, and it's relentlessly alive. If you listen closely, you start to hear a kind of harmony born from total disorder. And just like everything else here, it only gets louder the longer you stay. Once the ale really starts flowing and that thick stew begins to settle, the tavern undergoes a transformation. It's no longer just a place to grab a bite. It becomes a medieval casino, just without the velvet ropes and with about 10 times more yelling. Gambling is the sport of the evening. Everyone plays, from weathered soldiers with scars to barefoot boys betting with borrowed dice. There's no professional dealer, no pit boss, and zero regulation. You just have a cracked wooden table, a handful of copper coins, and the vague promise that someone is about to lose their dignity. Dice are the game of choice, carved from bone, wood, or whatever was lying around. They clatter across the tabletops like rolling thunder, with every toss followed by a wild mix of cheers, groans, and the occasional accusation of witchcraft. No one trusts the dice, but everyone uses them. Then you've got the cards. If you're in a slightly more cultured part of town, you might see thick, hand-painted cards that are worn to the edges, and always missing a few from the deck. The rules seem to shift depending on who's explaining them. One minute you're trying to get the highest number, the next you're matching symbols or just making it up as you go. It's like poker, but with way more slapping of the table. The wagers range from actual money to mugs of ale or even livestock. Yes, someone is currently betting a goat. Someone else just bet their boots, and another guy just bet his own freedom for the night. Spoiler alert, he lost. The regulars are slick. They shuffle too fast, roll the dice too slowly, and smile a little too wide. Cheating is practically half the fun. A hidden die here, a marked card there, or a well-timed cough right when the lucky player is about to move. If you win big, you'd better buy a round for the house, or you risk getting jumped in the alley. If you lose badly, you just smile, pretend you meant to do that, and slowly push your chair back toward the door. Side games are erupting everywhere. Arm wrestling, thumb wars, and the crowd favorite. Who can drink the most without falling over? The winner gets a round of applause. The loser earns a night sleeping under the table and a headache that'll last until next market day. Even when the rules are a total mystery and the stakes are absurd, the energy is addictive. In a medieval tavern, luck isn't just a game. It's a gamble with your purse, your pride, and quite possibly your pants. As the night deepens and the room gets warm and humid, a new kind of performance takes center stage. This one is made of words, music, and pure, confident nonsense. This is story time, medieval style. Our toothless bard clears his throat, plucking at those squeaky strings with a dramatic flourish. He launches into a ballad of heartbreak and heroism, something about a knight who fell in love with a mermaid and drowned nobly while reciting poetry. Absolutely no one believes a word of it. Everyone listens anyway. That's the code here. Truth is optional, but entertainment is everything. Around the other tables, the patrons join in. These aren't professional bards, they're just people with enough ale-fueled bravery to tell a tale. One guy swears he once wrestled a bear and lived to drink about it. Another claims he saw a witch turn a cow into a goat, which might explain the goat in the corner. A third insists he's a distant relative of Charlemagne. Every story starts with, You won't believe this, but... And they're right, we don't. But we want to. Here, boasts become ballads, mishaps become myths, and someone always tells a joke so incredibly bad that it circles all the way back around to being good. Someone else begins reciting a poem that they definitely plagiarized from a monk's dusty scroll. The room reacts with a mix of claps, hoots, or hurled bread crusts, depending entirely on the quality of the performance, or more likely, the quantity of ale already consumed. If luck is on your side, a professional skald or minstrel might be passing through. These are the real pros, traveling from village to village and trading their music for a few coins, a hot meal, and the rare luxury of sleeping indoors. Their songs are polished, their sagas are epic, and they have a dangerous talent for riling up a crowd. But even the professionals know the golden rule of tavern tales: never ever let the facts get in the way of a good story. In this smoke-filled room, with the fire crackling and the mugs sloshing, storytelling isn't just entertainment. It's a sacred tradition. It's the way you make friends, create enemies, and find that one lifelong drinking partner. By midnight, half the tavern is reenacting the story of the one-legged knight who fought off 6 highwaymen using nothing but a soup ladle. You laugh, you cheer, and you completely forget it's all made up, because in a medieval tavern, every liar is a legend as long as the story is good enough. As the night deepens and the ale keeps flowing, the atmosphere shifts. There's a new kind of boozy boldness in the air. The bard is halfway through his 3rd ballad about unfaithful shepherdesses, and suddenly everyone is feeling a bit romantic. Welcome to the world of medieval flirting, where subtlety has officially left the building. It usually starts with eye contact, or at least one eye squinting through a heavy, mead-induced haze. You'll see a man with maybe 2 remaining teeth lean across a grease-stained bench and slur, "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than the hearth." Her response? Hurling a hard bread crust directly at his forehead, the room erupts in cheers. Others try their luck with a gentler touch, offering to refill a mug, or clumsily offering to help carry a bowl of stew so it doesn't spill. Spoiler: it still spills. If you're a woman in the tavern, whether you're staff, a guest, or a traveling merchant, you're likely used to fending off at least 3 wannabe poets, 2 aggressive arm wrestlers, and 1 guy trying to impress you by balancing a dagger on his nose. Sometimes it works. Usually it just ends with a black eye or a suspiciously empty purse. For those actually looking for companionship, taverns offer more than just awkward flirting. Courtesans move through the room with practiced ease, quickly identifying who has the coins, who has the charm, and who's going to pass out before they even reach the stairs. The transactions might be discreet, but the drama they cause is loud. Jealous lovers? Oh, absolutely. Nothing sparks a tavern brawl faster than a stolen glance, a wandering hand, or a husband catching his wife laughing just a little too hard at the bard's raunchy joke about bishops. Suddenly tables are overturned. Mugs become heat-seeking missiles. A bench gets snapped in half, again. And yet, in the eye of this storm, genuine sparks actually fly. A shy baker's daughter and a traveling stonemason share a laugh over a bowl of mystery stew. 2 drunk farmers bond over their mutual hatred of turnips. Even a monk might accidentally find himself flirting with a nun. Love, or at least a very loud version of it, survives in even the rowdiest corners. In a medieval tavern, romance is equal parts charm, luck, and the ability to not fall face first into your bowl mid-sentence. You might win a heart, or you might earn a slap across the face. Either way, you're going to remember it, or at least hear all the embarrassing details the next morning. It was bound to happen eventually. Maybe a drink was spilled. Maybe someone got caught with an extra die in their sleeve. Maybe 2 people claimed the same bench and neither one was back down. Or maybe, just maybe, someone said something very specific about someone else's mother, goat, or soup. It doesn't really matter what the spark was. Suddenly, the tavern explodes. The room, once a blurry haze of music and clashing mugs, turns on a dime. A stool goes flying. A tankard crashes to the floor. Someone bellows, "Hold my bread!" and launches themselves over a bench with all the grace of a drunken catapult. Honestly, no one is even surprised. Most of the regulars don't even stop drinking. They just lean back to avoid the splash zone. In the Middle Ages, a bar fight isn't a rare tragedy. It's an expected feature, practically included in the price of the ale. And while it sounds terrifying, it's usually more of a comedy of errors than a deadly duel. People swing wildly, miss by a mile, trip over their own feet, and land face first in someone else's dinner. There's hair-pulling, beard-grabbing, and the sound of linen shirts being torn to shreds. The tavern keeper roars like a battlefield general, standing tall with a ladle in one hand and a heavy wooden club in the other. Occasionally, a random patron joins the fray with absolutely no idea why. They just saw the action and decided to leap in fists first. Real weapons are rare, though. Most folks know that pulling a blade turns a casual brawl into a tavern legend that ends with the guards, and no one wants to be banned from the only place in town that serves hot food. Eventually, someone hits the floor and stays there. Someone else stumbles into a wall and decides that's as good a place as any to sit and rethink their entire life. Then, just as quickly as it started, the fight burns out like a flickering candle. Here's the weird part. Once it's over, it's truly over. The fighters are separated. Mugs are refilled, and within 10 minutes, everyone is laughing again, including the guy with the bloody nose. No grudges, no lawsuits, just a few fresh bruises and a new nickname like One-Eyed Arnold or Benchbreaker Bill. In a medieval tavern, a good fight is just part of a good night out. It's messy, ridiculous, and weirdly bonding. So the brawl has settled. The bard has finally passed out mid-ballad, and your stomach is a heavy mix of mystery stew and fermented cider. It's time to sleep, or at least attempt to. But don't go expecting a feather bed and lavender-scented linens. This is a tavern, not a spa. If there's lodging, it's up a creaky staircase with slanted floors and beams low enough to test the durability of your skull. The rooms are tiny, freezing, and 100% shared. Privacy? Forget about it. You're sleeping shoulder to shoulder with strangers, some snoring like church bells, others dreaming loudly in languages you've never heard. The beds are basically lumpy, straw-stuffed mattresses crawling with what the locals fondly call companions. You lie down fully clothed, boots on, with a dagger tucked under your pillow, not for comfort, but as a defensive strategy. Blankets are shared, and so are smells. If the guy next to you had garlic for dinner, and someone always had garlic, it's going to become an intimate part of your dreams. If you're too broke for a room, you just find a spot downstairs on a bench, under a table, or curled up by the hearth next to a dog that may or may not actually belong to the tavern. You'll be stepped on, sneezed on, and probably used as a footrest. The tavern never truly goes silent. Even after the last mug is drained, there's always someone muttering in their sleep, a log popping in the fire, or a distant fart echoing through the rafters. Yet somehow you drift off. It's not clean, and it's definitely not comfortable, but it's safe enough. The fire keeps the worst of the chill away. The keeper keeps watch with one eye open and a club in hand, and the ambient noise becomes a strange human lullaby. You'll wake up with a sore neck, a mouth like sandpaper, and a bruise you don't remember getting. But for a few hours, you're part of a community of rogues, farmers, and fools. Dawn creeps in like an uninvited guest, sliding pale light through the cracks in the shutters and poking at your eyelids with merciless persistence. Overnight, the tavern has changed. It's not exactly quiet, but it's quieter in a defeated, hungover sort of way. You open one eye to find someone's boot resting on your chest. Someone else is mumbling about sheep taxes in their sleep. The bard is still under the table, clutching his lute like a long-lost lover. A chicken hops across the floor, pecking at yesterday's bread crusts, and no one even asks where it came from. The fire has died down to gray ash, leaving the room cold and smoky. A few patrons begin to stir, groaning like wounded warriors from battles fought entirely inside their own heads. One man sits up, takes one look at the room, and immediately lies back down, having decided that today just isn't worth the effort. The tavern keeper is already up, because of course they are, clattering mugs, sweeping the old straw into fresh piles, and reheating something in a pot that smells both inviting and slightly vengeful. They shoot a look at the various bodies still sprawled across the floor, then bang a heavy ladle against a tin mug like a morning bell from hell. Up or out? That's your official wake-up call. Don't go looking for a breakfast buffet. If you're lucky, there's more of that pottage, which is now even thicker than it was last night. The bread is rewarmed until it's just soft enough to chew without breaking a jaw, and the ale is watered down because no one has the physical or mental strength to complain this early. Some patrons just stumble outside, dunk their entire heads into a barrel of rainwater, and call it clean living. You check your pouch, 2 coins and a random button. Honestly, better than expected. Your boots are still there, too. One of them has a mysterious bite mark on the toe, but they're yours, and that's a win in my book. A few new faces start trickling in. Early risers, weary travelers, and workers who need a stiff drink before they face livestock, taxes, or worse, their neighbors. The tavern begins to stir again, like a massive beast slowly shaking off sleep. Someone is already retelling a story from last night, and it's already changed, of course. Now there were apparently 2 massive fights, and the bard's song was so good it summoned a literal ghost. Everyone just nods like it's gospel truth. The night was pure chaos, and the morning is groggy, grimy, and heavy with regret. And yet you find yourself smiling, because somehow you survived it. By now you've felt the sweat, the thick smoke, and the sticky ale under your boots. You've survived the shouting, the awkward flirting, the mystery pottage, and possibly even a flying bench. And through all that, one thing becomes crystal clear. The medieval tavern wasn't just a drinking hole. It was the beating heart of the entire community. In a world with no phones, no newspapers, and 0 social networks, the tavern was where the news lived. A merchant from the coast could share gossip from a foreign port. A soldier could describe the reality of the front lines. A bard could sing songs that stitched people together, even if the lyrics changed every single night. This was the ultimate place for connection. Farmers drank beside master craftsmen, and pilgrims shared bread with thieves. For a few hours, social classes blurred into a haze of wood smoke. Rumors were born here, alliances were forged, and grudges were either buried or fueled further, depending on how the dice rolled. The tavern was also where the real business happened. Deals were struck, and contracts were shaken over splinters and spilled cider. It was a court, a confessional, and a theater stage all rolled into one. You could find a job, lose your purse, get married, or start a lifelong feud in a single evening. But more than anything, it offered something you couldn't buy at the market or even pray for in a chapel: relief. Relief from the biting cold, from the back-breaking work, and from the endless, heavy seriousness of just trying to survive medieval life. For a few hours, you could sit near a roaring fire, hear a truly bad joke, sing an even worse song, and forget, just for a moment, how hard the world outside those heavy iron-hinged doors really was. Even if the ale was lukewarm, the bed was itchy, and the food seemed to have more bones than actual broth. The tavern gave you something priceless: the feeling of being truly alive among the living. In an age where everything from a sudden plague to a brutal winter could take you without a moment's notice, that was no small thing. When you stepped through those heavy doors, you weren't just buying a drink, you were buying a sense of belonging, a piece of a story, and, if the floor wasn't too packed, a spot near the fire that would stay lit until dawn. Long before the era of modern cafes, neighborhood pubs, or cozy coffee houses, there was the tavern. It was loud, it was dirty, it was brutally honest, and it was absolutely unforgettable. But as the fires of the tavern dim and the noise of the Middle Ages fades into the background, we travel much further back in time, to a world of golden sands and silent stone. Before she became the most iconic face of ancient Egypt, immortalized in that famous limestone bust with its razor-sharp cheekbones and a gaze frozen in serene confidence, Nefertiti was a woman shrouded in mystery. Her name literally translates to "the beautiful one has come," but where exactly she came from remains one of history's greatest riddles. Some historians believe she was the daughter of Ai, a high-ranking and powerful Egyptian official, which would have made her a sister to Akhenaten. Others argue she wasn't Egyptian at all, but a foreign princess sent to the Nile in a strategic marriage alliance. Regardless of her origins, her influence was undeniable. Nefertiti didn't just walk into the historical record, she struck it like lightning, sudden, brilliant, and completely transformative. She didn't enter Akhenaten's life as a passive queen meant to sit quietly in the shadows. Instead, she emerged as an equal partner in a reign that would eventually shake the very foundations of Egyptian religion and culture. Together, this power couple did the unthinkable. They dismantled centuries of tradition. They swept aside the ancient pantheon of gods and elevated the Aten, the sun disk, as the one true deity. This wasn't just a policy change. It was a radical, near-heretical revolution. And Nefertiti wasn't just a witness to it. She was at the front lines, leading sacred ceremonies, making offerings, and even being depicted in art smiting her enemies. That was a role usually reserved strictly for male pharaohs, yet there she was, holding the power of life and death in her hands. Unlike other queens who were relegated to the background of temple walls, Nefertiti was everywhere. In fact, she appears in more artwork from this period than Akhenaten himself. In these carvings, she isn't shown in a position of subservience. She stands tall, sometimes literally larger than life. In a society where pharaohs were considered divine, her spiritual and political proximity to the king suggests she was much more than a wife. Many believe she was, in every sense of the word, a co-ruler. But this meteoric rise came with massive tension. Egypt was a land of tradition, and it wasn't ready for this kind of upheaval. The old priesthood, stripped of their power and their gods, watched from the shadows with growing resentment. The capital was moved to a brand new city, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, completely severing ties with the old ways. Through every bit of this chaos, Nefertiti remained the face of the revolution. Her figure was etched into every stone wall. Her name was sung in every hymn to the sun. And yet, for all her visibility and power during her life, her exit from history is a total vanishing act. No confirmed tomb, no mummy, no record of her end, just a sudden, echoing silence. It's as if history, after showcasing her brilliance for so long, suddenly decided to look away. And perhaps that's exactly where her legend truly begins. To really understand Nefertiti's meteoric rise, you first have to meet the man who flipped the world on its head, Pharaoh Akhenaten. He wasn't born with that name. He started as Amenhotep IV, a prince in line to inherit a 1,000-year legacy of ancient gods and rigid tradition. But something shifted deep inside him. Some historians call it divine inspiration. Others have labeled it madness. Either way, once he took the throne, he turned his back on the mighty Amun and declared a new truth: there was only one God worth worshipping, the sun itself, the Aten. This wasn't just a religious shift. It was a massive earthquake that cracked the very bedrock of Egyptian civilization. Imagine a society entirely built around grand temples and secret rituals being told overnight that their gods were false and their worship was obsolete. Akhenaten didn't just preach this new monotheism, he enforced it with an iron hand. The temples of Amun were slammed shut, names were chiseled off monuments, and statues were smashed into dust. He even abandoned the old capital to build something entirely new, Akhetaten Amarna. It was a city dedicated solely to the Aten, designed so the sun would rise directly between the cliffs and bathe the streets in sacred light. And through every step of this radical journey, Nefertiti was right there at his side. She wasn't a silent consort, she was a full-blown participant. In the carvings of that era, she's shown worshipping the Aten with the exact same reverence as the pharaoh himself. Even the art style changed. It was no longer stiff and formal. It became fluid, exaggerated, and strangely intimate. We see portraits of the king and queen kissing, playing with their daughters, and praying in soft robes beneath the radiant rays of the sun. It was a family portrait unlike anything Egypt had seen before or since. In this new world, Nefertiti was everywhere. At times, she even completely overshadowed her husband. Some historians are convinced she held the real political power, perhaps even acting as a co-regent. There are inscriptions referring to a ruler named Neferuaten, a name many believe she adopted when she began ruling in her own right. Whether Akhenaten shared the throne out of love, strategy, or pure necessity, one thing is clear. Without Nefertiti, this revolution might never have held together. But revolutions are fragile things. The old gods don't take kindly to being replaced, and the people were quietly watching, waiting for the old order to return. By the height of her influence, Nefertiti had become more than just a queen. She was an icon of divine femininity and royal power. Egypt had seen great queens before, like Hatshepsut or Ahmose Nefertari, but Nefertiti felt different. She wasn't ruling from the shadows or seizing power through traditional warfare. She was reshaping the spiritual and cultural fabric of an entire empire in real time as a living goddess. She bore Akhenaten 6 daughters, including Meritaten and Ankhesenamun, all of whom were frequently depicted in those famous family scenes beneath the sun's rays. Curiously, though, no sons were ever confirmed. In a kingdom absolutely obsessed with lineage and male heirs, this was both a political disaster and a historical mystery. Was it just fate, or was there something else at play? Some suggest Akhenaten may have had sons with other wives, or even more controversially, with Nefertiti herself, fueling modern theories that range from the scholarly to the outright scandalous. What we know for certain is that motherhood was the absolute heartbeat of her image. In the art of that time, Nefertiti isn't some distant, untouchable figure. She's portrayed cradling her children, their tiny arms reaching up to touch her cheeks in a way that feels incredibly modern. These aren't stiff, cold statues meant to intimidate. These are living moments frozen in limestone, intimate, emotional, and radiant. In an age where pharaohs were often viewed as distant, terrifying gods, Nefertiti's portrayal as a nurturing mother softened the divine, making the monarchy feel human for the first time. But don't let the softness fool you. There was another side to her iconography that was pure, raw power. In multiple depictions, Nefertiti is shown wearing the blue crown, a headpiece usually reserved strictly for male rulers. She's seen smiting enemies, charging into the distance on a war chariot, and making sacred offerings to the gods without Akhenaten anywhere in sight. These weren't just symbolic gestures for the sake of art. This was a queen performing the holy duties of a king. It hints at a radical truth. Nefertiti wasn't just preparing for a partnership. She was likely preparing to rule the world on her own. Whispers in the historical record suggest that as Akhenaten's health began to fail, perhaps under the weight of genetic disorders or the sheer stress of his collapsing revolution, Nefertiti stepped up, taking on more and more governing responsibility. But this is exactly where the record starts to blur. In the final years of Akhenaten's reign, she simply vanishes. No grand funeral inscriptions, no mourning scenes, no confirmed burial site. One day she was the most visible woman on the planet, etched into every wall and praised in every hymn. And then, like a breath caught in the desert wind, she was gone. Usually around year 12 of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, the records grow eerily silent. Her name is chiseled away, and her image fades. For a woman so central to Egypt's massive cultural upheaval, this absence is a total black hole in history. So, what really happened? The simplest theory is that she died. Childbirth was a gamble back then, even for royalty. Her second daughter, Meketaten, also disappears from the records around the same time, which points toward a dual tragedy, a mother and child lost in one dark moment. But if that were the case, why was there no elaborate tribute? This was a woman worshipped as a living goddess. A quiet, unremarked death just doesn't fit the script. Others think it was political. Maybe she fell from favor as the court became increasingly isolated. Perhaps she was sidelined for another consort. Some even point to an enigmatic figure named Smenkhkare, who appears briefly as a co-ruler. But here is the most electrifying theory. Nefertiti didn't disappear at all. She transformed. Evidence shows a ruler named Neferuaten took the throne in the final years. This individual used feminine grammar in their inscriptions and even referred to Akhenaten as her beloved husband. Could this have been Nefertiti, crowned as pharaoh in her own right? If so, she would have joined the rarest ranks in human history, a female king, standing where Hatshepsut once stood. But even that theory eventually dissolves into the sand. This mysterious reign ends abruptly, and then a more familiar name emerges, Tutankhaten, the boy who would later be known as Tutankhamun. He would grow up to reverse everything his parents fought for, restoring the old gods and abandoning the Sun City. If Nefertiti did reign alone, it was a ghost reign, short, frantic, and visible only in broken relics. Just as suddenly as she arrived, Egypt's most powerful woman vanished. But her legend was only just beginning to take shape. As the dust of Amarna settled, a new boy king stepped forward, barely old enough to hold a scepter. We know him as King Tut, and while the world is obsessed with the treasures in his tomb, the biggest question remains unanswered. Who was his mother? On that, the stones of Egypt are frustratingly silent. It's almost certain that his father was Akhenaten, but the identity of his mother remains one of the most frustrating puzzles in archaeology. Some scholars are convinced Nefertiti was merely his stepmother, while others point to the timing and art of the era to argue she was his biological mother. If she did give birth to Tutankhamun, it would explain so much. His early reign was clearly guided by a steady, experienced hand, and the massive decision to reverse his father's religious revolution might not have been the choice of a 9-year-old boy. That's where the intrigue really deepens. Who was actually steering the ship during Tut's fragile early years? A child can't dismantle and restore a religious empire alone. Someone was behind the scenes. Someone who understood court politics, religion, and the power of public symbolism. Could it have been Nefertiti, ruling from the shadows, or perhaps her possible father, the high priest A? Maybe they worked together to bury the chaos of Amarna and return Egypt to its old gods. One of the most compelling clues is a golden shrine found in Tut's tomb. It shows a woman anointing the young king, and her features are eerily similar to Nefertiti's. If that was her, she never truly vanished. She just became a ghost in the machine of the Egyptian state. But without a named tomb or a confirmed mummy, we're left with nothing but fragments. If she did guide King Tut, her fingerprints are all over his reign, yet her name has been scrubbed from the temples and left off the king lists. It's a rich irony that Tutankhamun's fame eventually resurrected her image. In searching for his story, the world accidentally stumbled back onto hers. For a woman who stood at the absolute center of Egypt's most radical era, as queen, priestess, and possible pharaoh, Nefertiti left behind no confirmed tomb. No sarcophagus, no funerary mask, no inscriptions of her final words to the gods. It's as if she evaporated into the desert heat. This absence has haunted Egyptologists for over a century, in a culture obsessed with the afterlife, where every noble was mummified and buried with a GPS for the soul's journey. How could one of the most powerful women in history just be lost? Theories are everywhere. Maybe she was buried hastily and without ceremony as the Amarna period collapsed. Perhaps her radical legacy made her too dangerous for the new regime to honor. Her tomb might have been dismantled, and her name defaced as part of the sweeping effort to erase the heresy of Akhenaten. Vengeance in stone-cut hieroglyphs was a common political tool back then. But there's a more tantalizing theory. Her tomb isn't lost. It's just misidentified, or still hidden in plain sight. Some researchers believe she lies within the Valley of the Kings, concealed behind the very walls of King Tut's tomb. In 2015, radar scans of KV-62 indicated possible hidden chambers. The idea of a queen sleeping just inches away, sealed off and forgotten beneath layers of gold and history, captured the world's imagination. Egyptologists held their breath, but further scans were inconclusive. Funding dried up, and once again, Nefertiti retreated into the shadows of myth. Yet her absence is incredibly loud. We have her image everywhere, captured in stone and pigment. Her famous bust in Berlin still gazes with unfathomable grace across the museum glass, looking as if she knows something we don't, as if she's just waiting. Every year, new digs in Amarna and the valley stir up fresh whispers. Could a sealed chamber finally give up her secrets? Or is she destined to remain an unfinished sentence in the story of Egypt? If history tried to bury her, it didn't succeed for long. The search for Nefertiti has never truly stopped, it's only deepened. And if you wonder why we still care, the answer sits under soft lights in Berlin's News Museum. The painted limestone bust, rediscovered in 1912, has captivated the world ever since. She gazes forward with such poise and serenity, her long, graceful neck and distinct blue crown making her features feel almost modern. One eye remains unfinished, perhaps intentionally, or perhaps just a detail forgotten in the sculptor's final days. Even incomplete, she is timeless. When German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt first brushed the dust off her face in the ruins of the sculptor Thutmose's studio, he knew immediately what he had found. In his diary, he wrote simply, "No use describing it. You have to see it." Once the world saw her, Nefertiti became more than a historical figure. She became a global symbol of beauty, power, and ancient mystery. But even her bust isn't free of drama. Germany acquired it during a time of loose antiquity laws, and Egypt has been fighting for its return for decades. To the Egyptians, she belongs at home, in the land where the sun once touched her skin, and where she once stood as a living goddess beneath the rays of the Aten. But Germany has consistently refused, claiming her fragility makes it far too dangerous for her to travel. Critics, of course, say it's more about prestige. Nefertiti brings in massive crowds. She is, for all intents and purposes, their Mona Lisa. Still, her presence, wherever she may be stationed, has fundamentally changed how the world perceives ancient women. She wasn't just some passive beauty meant to be looked at. Her bust captures something deeply regal, assertive, and almost challenging. She looks like someone who held profound secrets, made life-altering decisions, and shifted the course of empires. And the truth is, she did. It's remarkable how a single sculpture, delicate and silent, can resurrect a soul lost to the depths of time. We may never find her tomb, and we may never know exactly how she died. But through this limestone bust, Nefertiti achieved something truly extraordinary. She became immortal, not in gold, but in the collective human memory. The face may be still, but the story it tells continues to speak louder than ever across the centuries. Nefertiti's story lives in that thin space between stone and silence, between the facts we know and the legends we desperately want to believe. Few figures in ancient history have inspired such relentless fascination and such profound mystery. She is a living paradox, one of the most documented women of her time, yet still largely unknowable. Over the centuries, she's been reimagined in 1,000 different ways. To some, she was a goddess in human form, the physical embodiment of divine beauty. To others, she was a political mastermind, the true force behind the throne, or perhaps even the throne itself. Some see her as a romantic figure tragically lost in the sands of a failed revolution, while others paint her as an ambitious, perhaps even ruthless, player navigating a collapsing empire with chilling elegance. But what do we truly know? We know she was far more than just a royal wife. Her imagery rivals that of the greatest kings. Her presence during sacred religious rites, royal ceremonies, and even scenes of battle reveals a woman who didn't just stand beside power, but wielded it. In a patriarchal world, she carved out her own massive space, not through open rebellion, but through sheer presence, poise, and a command of the visual and spiritual language of her time. We know she was the heart of one of history's boldest religious shifts. While Akhenaten may have envisioned the monotheistic sun cult, it was Nefertiti who gave it a face. She was the bridge between the Aten above and the people below. She didn't just serve the gods. She was their image. And we know that after she vanished, the world tried to erase her. The backlash against Akhenaten's regime swept her name toward oblivion. Her statues were smashed, her inscriptions defaced, and her role in history was intentionally buried. Yet here we are, over 3,000 years later, still whispering her name. Why? Because myth has a way of surviving where facts fail. When a woman becomes both an icon and an enigma, she slips into a space where time simply can't reach her. Sometimes the questions echo much louder than the answers. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how Nefertiti wanted it. To be remembered but never fully explained, to be admired but never contained. To live forever, not as a woman confined to one single tomb, but as a queen of endless speculation. More than 3 millennia have passed since she last walked beneath the Egyptian sun. Yet her shadow still stretches across our modern world, etched into museum glass, debated in academic halls, and splashed across screens and novels. Unlike most historical figures, she hasn't faded. If anything, she grows larger with every passing year. There's something irresistible about her, and it isn't just the beauty. We've seen beauty before. It's the mystery. The deliberate blank spaces in her biography feel like a challenge, a taunt, as if she's daring us to try and understand her, knowing full well we never truly will. In that way, she has become something more than just a person. She has become archetypal. Every generation reinterprets Nefertiti in its own image, finding in her whatever strength, beauty, or mystery they need to see. In the early 20th century, she was viewed as an exotic queen, mysterious, silent, and submissive. During the feminist wave, she transformed into a symbol of raw female power, an ancient ruler nearly erased by a patriarchal lens. Today, she's a style icon, a representative of African royalty, a political heavyweight, and even a potential pharaoh. Nefertiti has lived 1,000 second lives, fueled not by dusty facts, but by our collective imagination. Maybe that is the most fitting afterlife of all. In ancient Egypt, immortality wasn't just about mummification. It was about memory. If your name was spoken, your image seen, and your story retold, you lived on. You could cross the field of reeds and dine with the gods, existing forever beyond death. Nefertiti, whether by brilliant design or sheer chance, has achieved exactly that. Her name echoes across continents. Her face is one of the most recognized in human history. Her story, though fractured, still demands the world's attention. Her greatest legacy wasn't carved into a hidden tomb or sealed beneath desert stone. It was this enduring, restless curiosity. She left behind a perfect mystery, a life half seen, half erased, and wholly unforgettable. Perhaps that was her final act of power, not just to rule an empire or raise royal daughters, but to become timeless. Nefertiti, the beautiful one who has come, never truly left. She remains in our questions, our wonder, and our need to remember the women history tried to forget. She lives on, not in gold or glory, but in the eternal act of being searched for. And what is more immortal than that? Now we travel east, to a place where the clouds hang low and the wind hums through bamboo groves. Here a dragon lies coiled. But this is no myth, no fire-breathing beast of legend. This dragon is made of earth and stone, carved by centuries of calloused hands and patient vision. These are the Longji rice terraces, known to the locals as the dragon's backbone. Its curves ripple across the mountainside like scales shimmering with water, rice, and ancient pride. From a distance, the terraces look like a massive sleeping creature. The hills ripple with rhythmic precision, each layer rising and falling like the sinew of a living form. But step closer, and you'll find something even more alive. Water flows in soft whispers along carefully dug channels. Seedlings flutter in the breeze, and at dawn, the morning mist drapes the landscape like breath rising from the dragon's nostrils. These terraces weren't built in haste. Their story began over 700 years ago when the Zhuang and Yao people, ethnic minorities with deep ancestral ties to these peaks, chose to tame the slopes rather than abandon them. Flat land was a luxury they didn't have. Machinery was non-existent. So they looked to the mountain and asked a simple question. How do we feed ourselves here? The answer took generations. Armed with little more than stone tools and bamboo baskets, they carved the hills inch by inch, year by year. With every level they built, they didn't just shape the land, they taught it to breathe with them. Rainfall became a resource. A steep slope became sustenance. Rice, the very staple of life, began to grow where gravity once ruled supreme. Over time, the terraces began to resemble a dragon in repose, strong, eternal, and sacred. This was more than just agriculture. It was harmony, a silent pact between humans and nature. No part of the mountain was wasted, and no part was forced to bend violently. Instead, the people worked with the earth, following its curves, listening to the wind, and guiding the water. Today, the dragon's backbone still feeds entire villages. But more than that, it reminds us what true patience can build. In a world racing forward at breakneck speed, here lies a dragon that was never chased, only carved. Layer by layer, dream by dream. To walk among the Longji terraces is to step into a world defined by persistence. There is no illusion here. No machine tracks, no corporate survey markers. What stretches across these mountains are the fingerprints of human endurance. Every curve, every slope, and every drop of water has been arranged stone by hands that knew the pulse of the land. Centuries ago, when the Zhuang and Yao peoples first looked upon these steep and unforgiving hillsides, They didn't see an obstacle. They saw an opportunity. The flat, fertile valleys were already taken, but up here, amid the rugged peaks, there was possibility. If only they could make the earth listen. With no heavy machinery and no modern tools, they began their work with wooden shovels, stone hoes, and simple bamboo baskets carried on backs already worn by time. Slowly, the terraces started to take shape, horizontal veins stretching across the mountain, held firmly in place by hand-stacked stone walls. These weren't just accidental cuts into the slope, they were highly calculated. Each level had to be perfectly balanced, not only to hold the water, but to guide it from one tier to the next without a single drop going to waste. A single miscalculation could trigger a landslide, causing an entire section to collapse. If a terrace was too steep, the water would rush and erode the soil; too flat, and it would stagnate and rot the crop. They measured this balance not with rulers, but with generations of intuition. Children watched their elders. Elders watched the seasons, and in time, the mountain gave in, not out of surrender, but out of trust. The result is a landscape that defies nature by flowing perfectly with it. From the valley floor to the cloud-kissed peaks, these terraces rise like a spiral staircase to the sky. They mirror the topography with such elegance it almost looks as if the mountain grew them itself. But make no mistake, humans shaped these curves. With no engines, no concrete, and no architectural degrees. Just time, trial, error, and the unshakable belief that even the steepest land can be made to serve life. Today, these terraces are still functional, still farmed, and still respected. There are no bulldozers and no shortcuts. The old ways survive because they proved that tradition, when rooted deep enough, can outlast any storm. If the dragon's backbone is the muscle and bone, then water is its blood. It flows quietly, without pumps or mechanical engines, tracing ancient channels that slip from mountaintop springs into every terrace below. This hydraulic choreography is the secret life of the terraces, the reason they have endured for 7 centuries. At the very top of the mountain, rainwater and natural springs are caught in narrow ditches and earthen canals. From there, gravity becomes the farmer's silent, most reliable ally. The water descends through terrace after terrace, pooling gently in each field before spilling into the next. The design is fluid and seamless, ensuring every patch of rice receives exactly what it needs, no more, no less. There are no valves or digital switches here. Control lies in subtle gates made of stone or wood, adjusted by hand and habit. The villagers are the guardians of this delicate system. They walk the ridges daily, checking, adjusting, and listening to the sound of the flow. It's less like farming and more like playing a massive landscape-sized instrument. One wrong note, and the whole song is off. But the water does more than just feed the rice. It mirrors the sky. In the spring, when the terraces are first flooded, the paddies turn to glass. They reflect the clouds, the sun, and the stars on a clear night. It's surreal, as if the mountain has become a living mirror reflecting heaven and earth. Then comes summer, and the water thickens with stalks of vibrant green. The reflection fades, replaced by movement, an emerald sea of rice plants swaying in the wind. In autumn, the water glistens through the gold of ripened grain. And in winter, when the farming ceases, snow and frost take over. The dragon sleeps, but the channels remain, quiet veins awaiting the next spring. Time moves differently here. It isn't measured in hours, but in moisture. By the first trickle of the mountain thaw, by the sound of frogs returning to the paddies, by the heavy scent of wet soil. In a world that measures life in seconds, the people of Longji still measure it in seasons and drops. The dragon lives not in fire, but in the ripples of water pulsing through a living masterpiece. Spring in the Longji Mountains begins not with blossoms, but with water. As the snow melts on the higher peaks, streams trickle downward, breathing life into the waiting terraces. The mirror-like paddies are ready. The dragon stirs, and the people prepare for the ritual that ties them to every generation before them, planting the first seed. There is no grand announcement, only a quiet, rhythmic movement. Farmers, young and old, rise with the morning mist. They walk barefoot along the narrow ridges, straw hats pulled low, baskets balanced on their backs. The air is thick with the scent of soaked earth and mountain wind. The paddies, flooded just days earlier, shimmer like polished jade. This is not a task for machines, and it never has been. Each rice seedling, nurtured in nursery beds, is transplanted by hand, one by one, line by line. The workers step into the cold, knee-deep water and press the tender stalks into the mud with fingers that are both firm and incredibly gentle. It's a rhythm that feels almost sacred. Back bent, arm out, hand press, repeat. This goes on all day, sometimes for weeks. Children follow along, splashing in the shallows and mimicking their elders. They aren't learning from textbooks. They're learning by standing in the water, feeling the resistance of the mud, and training their eyes to judge the perfect spacing. This is how knowledge survives here. It's lived, not just spoken. Planting is more than just labor. It's a ceremony. Offerings are made to the spirits of the mountain, and ancient songs drift across the slopes. In some villages, the elders are the ones to scatter the first handful of seedlings as a blessing. Every field planted is a promise, to the land, to the ancestors, and to the children yet to come. The pace is unhurried. No one rushes the dragon, no one races the mountain. Instead, the planting becomes a meditation, a slow dance between human and nature. As the days pass, tiny green shoots begin to rise from the watery fields like whispers. From this moment on, the terraces grow more than just rice, they grow hope. Each seed is a prayer, and each row is a quiet defiance against hunger and haste. The dragon is awake, the mountain breathes, and the future is planted, one seed at a time. Scattered along the ridge lines and nestled in the crooks of the terraces are the true heartbeats of the dragon's backbone. Villages like Pingan, Dai, and Jinkung. These aren't just settlements. They are living museums where every home, path, and balcony clings to the mountain like a memory that refuses to fade. The houses are built of timber, resting on tall stilts to protect them from the heavy rains and the unforgiving steepness of the slopes. Their rooftops, dark and slanted, perfectly mirror the lines of the terraces they overlook. From a distance, they look like wooden lanterns floating on waves of green. Inside, life is simple and deeply communal. Generations share a single home, and meals are cooked over open wood fires, sending the scent of rice wine and bamboo smoke drifting into the mountain air. The people here belong to ethnic minorities, primarily the Zhuang and the Red Yao, each with their own language, customs, and stories. You'll recognize the Yao women instantly. Their long black hair, which remains uncut since childhood, is coiled into elegant, heavy shapes atop their heads. Sometimes they let it fall like silk waterfalls when they bathe in the river, a scene so graceful it borders on myth. Despite modernization slowly creeping up the mountain trails, tradition holds its ground. You'll see hand-woven clothes dyed in deep indigo, hear the creak of wooden looms in quiet rooms, and listen to music played on reed pipes and bronze drums during festivals. Hospitality here isn't a transaction, it's a reflex. Guests are offered tea brewed from local leaves, rice wine served in carved gourds, and stories from elders who remember the mountain long before electricity arrived. They speak of dragons in the mist, of the ancestors who first carved these hills, and of the spirits who still guard the fields. Even though tourism brings visitors from every corner of the globe, the rhythm of village life continues largely undisturbed. The rice still grows. The rituals still mark the seasons. The terraces, like the people, endure, not by resisting change, but by absorbing it slowly, like water descending one level at a time. Here, within the dragon's coils, life isn't rushed. It flows. It echoes. It remembers. To walk the Longji terraces is to walk through layers of myth. These hills aren't just soil and stone, they are alive with stories carried on the wind. For the villagers, the mountains are sacred beings, shaped by gods and inhabited by tales passed down through the centuries. The most enduring legend, of course, is that of the sleeping dragon whose body stretches across the ridges, its spine rising in the coils of the terraces themselves. Locals believe these curves aren't just man-made, but are the dragon's scales rising and falling with its breath. When the mist rolls in from the valley and blankets the paddies in white, they say the dragon is stirring, breathing gently in its ancient sleep. Another legend tells us that these terraces were born from a moment of divine generosity. A long time ago, during a period of devastating famine, the ancestors climbed to the highest peaks to pray for mercy. Moved by their devotion, the gods sent the rain and instructed the people to carve the hills into steps so the rice could finally take root. As the story goes, the dragon appeared right then and there to guide their hands. Ever since, they've honored the mountain with a deep, quiet respect. They don't shout in the fields, and they never cut down a tree without a prayer. These aren't rules written in dusty books. They live in the songs sung during planting, in the incense burned before the growing season, and in the heavy silence of a misty morning. Children grow up hearing these tales not as bedtime fantasies, but as absolute truths embedded in the very dirt. To laugh at the dragon is to risk a bad harvest. To disrespect the spirits is to invite a flood. There are spirits in the water, too. To this day, some farmers still make offerings before releasing the spring water into the terraces for the first time each year. A few drops of rice wine and a prayer murmured under their breath. It's not for show. It's a tradition as natural as tying a shoe. And honestly, whether you believe in dragons or not, you can feel something sacred hanging in the air. Maybe it's the silence, or maybe it's the clouds. But there's a quiet certainty that this place is more than just human labor. It's a story still being told, written in stone, water, and rice. For centuries, the dragon's backbone was a secret kept by the mountains, remote, quiet, and known only to the people who called it home. But no place, no matter how sacred, stays untouched forever. Eventually, the roads arrived, and the wires followed. Tourists with cameras and smartphones began to climb the hills alongside the farmers, and these ancient terraces faced a brand new question: how do you survive the modern world? At first, there was a real sense of worry. People feared the mountain would be sold off piece by piece, that concrete would replace the warmth of wood, and that their culture would just become a costume for tourists. But the people of Longji didn't just endure. They adapted. They didn't abandon the past. They just wove the present into it, one careful thread at a time. Villagers began opening their homes to guests, not as flashy resorts, but as authentic family stays. Visitors eat local meals like sticky rice steamed in bamboo and wild greens picked that very morning. They sleep in the traditional wooden stilt houses where roosters still serve as the alarm clock. This isn't a curated show, it's honest and real. And the farming? It hasn't stopped. Every season, the locals still flood those terraces, still plant every seedling by hand, and still harvest with sickles worn smooth by decades of use. Children might go to school during the day, but you'll find them in the fields at dusk. Tourism brings in the income, but the rice is what brings life. One supports the other, and both are essential. Even though some young people head for the bright lights of the cities, many eventually find their way back. There's something magnetic about these terraces that's much deeper than simple nostalgia. It's the sound of the water sliding through the channels, the way the stars reflect in the glass-like paddies, and the way the mountains teach you how to be patient. Sure, the festivals might have gotten a bit louder. There might be microphones now where there were once only drums, but the heartbeat remains the same. Today, signs in Mandarin and English stand beside the sacred springs, but the rituals haven't stopped. The offerings are still made, and the elders still lead the ancient songs. The dragon's backbone didn't resist change, it absorbed it with grace and balance. These terraces remain not because they are frozen in time, but because they breathe with it, flexing, adjusting, but never breaking. In an age where tradition is so often sacrificed on the altar of progress, Longji stands as quiet proof that progress can walk gently if it chooses. It shows us that the old ways still have a place in our modern world, especially when they are this beautiful. The dragon's backbone is never the same place twice. With each season it sheds its skin, transforms its colors, and shifts its mood. While cities change over years, these terraces change in weeks, draped not just in light, but in a deep, ancient rhythm. To stand among them for a full year is to witness a mountain breathe. Spring arrives like a silver mirror. The terraces are flooded in preparation for planting, and the still water reflects the sky like liquid glass. At this time, the clouds drift not just above you, but seemingly beneath your feet. Visitors often speak of it as walking through heaven. The fields look empty, but they are humming with potential. Beneath the surface, life is stirring. Summer brings a sudden burst of emerald. The rice shoots stretch tall and straight, blanketing the hills in a lush cascade. From a distance, the terraces look like ribbons of green velvet rolling in every direction. The air is warm and heavy. Frogs call from the paddies, and the farmers' hats bob like tiny sails on a jade sea as they work from dawn until dusk. Autumn is gold, harvest time. The rice matures, and the terraces catch fire in the sunlight, glowing with grain. The fields ripple in the wind, and the sound of drums begins to echo through the villages. Families gather, songs are sung, and sticky rice is prepared for the feast. It's more than a season, it's a celebration. The dragon, now fully awake, offers up its bounty. Winter draws the mountain back into stillness. The terraces are empty, the water is drained, and the dragon rests. Sometimes snow falls, dusting the steps in soft white. Other times, frost clings to the stone walls like delicate lace. There are no tools in the fields and no voices in the wind, only silence. The dragon sleeps, waiting. Each season writes a different poem. Spring reflects, summer grows, autumn feeds, and winter rests. The true beauty of Longji isn't just in its shape, but in its cycle, in how it accepts the passing of time without a hint of resistance. Photographers may chase the light here, hoping to capture something eternal, but the terraces don't freeze for anyone. They move. They breathe. They teach us softly that beauty isn't static. It's a practice, a rhythm, and a promise renewed with every season. In the end, these terraces are more than just fields. They are a vow, quiet, curved, and carved into the mountainside. It is a promise passed down from hand to hand, generation to generation. The dragon's backbone isn't just a wonder of agriculture or a masterpiece of engineering. It is the story of what happens when humans choose to live with the land, not against it. There were easier paths. The ancestors could have moved to the valleys or chased flatter ground, but they stayed. They studied the slope, listened to the stone, and followed the water. In doing so, they made the impossible ordinary, feeding entire villages on the side of a mountain. Every curve holds a lesson about patience, legacy, and care. These terraces weren't built in decades, they took centuries. There is no shortcut to harmony, and no machine can replicate the knowledge etched into each stone wall by calloused hands and quiet persistence. And yet nothing about them is rigid. The terraces are alive. They evolve and bend with the weather, the needs of the people, and the shape of the world. That is their secret. Even now, as the modern world climbs the hills with its signals and screens, the terraces remain grounded. They change, but they do not vanish. because their roots aren't just in the soil. They are in the stories, the rituals, and the simple, enduring act of planting a seed and trusting the sky. To walk the dragon's backbone is to witness a contract between humanity and the earth, signed with sweat and sun and renewed with every harvest. It's a reminder that progress doesn't always mean speed, and that greatness doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes it just murmurs like a stream slipping over stone, and perhaps that is exactly why these terraces speak to so many of us, from the local farmers to the weary travelers and the quiet dreamers. They represent something we've nearly forgotten, that the most lasting things in this world aren't built with brute force, but with rhythm, humility, and time. The dragon sleeps, the people endure, and the mountain remembers. Most visitors to Giza lift their eyes to the sky, instantly drawn to the towering silhouettes of the pyramids and the enigmatic gaze of the Great Sphinx. But very few think to ask what might lie beneath, under the shifting sands, under the Nile, and under centuries of forgotten currents. In the quiet shallows near the ancient village of Abu Rawash, just a short distance from the main Giza plateau, a strange tale is stirring. It's a story of something enormous, eroded, and largely ignored, an underwater sphinx. Local fishermen have whispered about it for generations, a smooth-backed shape that seems far too symmetrical to be a mere accident of nature. They describe a feline form, half buried in mud and waterlogged sediment. When the Nile's waters recede during extreme droughts, parts of it actually emerge, stone curves, distinct grooves, and what some swear is a carved paw, impossibly worn but unmistakably shaped by human hands. You won't find this on any tourist map. There are no guideposts, no velvet ropes, and no tour buses idling nearby. It's just an area thick with reeds, brackish water, and a heavy, weighted silence. Explorers who have ventured there claim the land itself feels different, charged, as if memory is still clinging to the mud. Beneath the murky surface, sonar scans have picked up geometric patterns and what appear to be massive stone blocks placed with clear intent. But what truly startles people are the claims that this submerged figure might predate the pyramids entirely, not by decades, but by millennia. If true, it would shatter the established chronology of Egyptian civilization. The mainstream timeline anchors the Great Sphinx at around 2500 BCE. But this underwater form, if genuinely carved, could belong to an age when the Sahara was still a lush green savanna, and the Nile ran wild through a much wetter land. Skeptics, of course, dismiss the whole thing as a misidentified rock formation, limestone shaped by water, and a heavy dose of wishful thinking. But the grooves, the curves, and the uncanny alignment with celestial markers invite more questions than they provide answers. For now, the site remains unexcavated, and official archaeologists have largely looked the other way. Perhaps it's nothing, or perhaps it's everything, a relic not just of Egypt's past, but of a world lost to flood and time. For now, the so-called underwater sphinx lies quiet. It isn't sleeping, it's waiting. And if it could speak, you have to wonder what secrets it would tell, and why so many seem determined not to listen. The legend of the underwater sphinx moved from whispered folklore to global curiosity in the 1980s. That's when a handful of independent researchers and divers began publishing strange, unsettling reports. They shared accounts of a massive, lion-bodied figure partially submerged near the Giza Plateau. The early photographs were grainy, inconclusive, and easily dismissed by the experts. But they sparked something that couldn't be put back in the bottle: curiosity, and, more dangerously, doubt. One of the most vocal early proponents was an amateur Egyptologist who claimed to have seen a weathered monument deep beneath silt and flood layers during a brief drought window. According to him, this wasn't just an isolated rock or a trick of erosion. It had geometry. It had legs. It had symmetry. It even had the faint, ghostly suggestion of a carved face. Naturally, this challenged the traditional narrative. Egyptology as a discipline rests on very specific structures and established timelines. Most scholars place the construction of the Giza complex during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. The suggestion of another sphinx, one that is older and partially submerged, would require us to rethink not just Egyptian history, but the timeline of human civilization itself. Mainstream academics responded with extreme caution and even a bit of disdain. Without a peer-reviewed excavation, carbon dating, or stratigraphic studies, the claim couldn't be taken seriously. Many argued that nature in Egypt often mimics the intentional, that wind, water, and time are perfectly capable sculptors. But those photos? They just kept circulating. The sonar readings just wouldn't let the mystery die. They continued to spit out patterns that were simply too regular, too smooth, and, to be honest, too suggestive to ignore. Then, the theorists moved in. Authors, filmmakers, and fringe historians began weaving a narrative that this wasn't just a rock, but a relic of a forgotten civilization, perhaps pre-dynastic or even the stuff of Atlantean myth, lost in a cataclysmic flood that once scoured the Sahara. They pointed to the water erosion on the Great Sphinx we all know, hinted at lost technologies, and suggested that what lies beneath the Nile might be far older than our collective memory allows. But even as the debate grew louder, the ground stayed still. No official dig was launched, no museum stepped up to claim it, and the Sphinx, if that's truly what it is, remained right where it's always been, buried in silt, caught in the tug-of-war between myth and mud. The idea that something near Giza could predate the pyramids isn't just provocative, it's revolutionary. If this underwater figure is more than a coincidence, then Egypt's story didn't start in the 4th dynasty. It began way back in prehistory, when the Sahara was a lush green savanna and the Nile was a wild, unpredictable force. This theory really gained traction in the 90s, when geologist Dr. Robert Schoch took a hard look at the Great Sphinx itself. He argued that those deep, vertical fissures on the Sphinx's enclosure weren't carved by wind and sand, but by rainfall, heavy, sustained, ancient rainfall that hasn't touched the Giza Plateau since at least 7000 BCE. That one observation pushed the possible date of the Sphinx back by thousands of years, long before the first pharaohs ever carved their names into stone. And the logic follows. If water shaped the original Sphinx, could water also have hidden an even older sibling? The underwater Sphinx sits in a lower region near ancient floodplains. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have hinted at rectangular foundations and deliberate shaping buried under the silt. These signs suggest the site might come from a time before Egypt even had hieroglyphs. Supporters point to the missing chapters of human history, the gap between the end of the last ice age and the rise of the first dynasties. This was a time when the Nile was shifting courses and the Sahara was transitioning from grasslands to desert. Entire civilizations could have risen and fallen, completely undocumented. To traditional historians, the idea of pre-literate people building monuments on this scale sounds impossible. But is it? Look at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built around 9600 BCE by hunter-gatherers, featuring megalithic pillars that predate Stonehenge by millennia. Could Egypt be hiding a similar secret? An ancient culture that marked the land with stone long before papyrus ever carried their stories. If so, we aren't just looking at forgotten ruins, we're looking at a forgotten age. Stone doesn't lie, it remembers. Around the site of this submerged mystery, the stone tells a persistent story of water. The sediment layers and erosion marks hint at a history from long before the desert turned dry. Geologists who have examined the data from Abu Rawash note those peculiar, smooth, rounded grooves. These aren't the marks of wind-blown sand. They are the signatures of flowing water and heavy prehistoric rain. Forces that haven't existed in this region for an incredibly long time. At the underwater site, we see the same rainfall signature found on the Great Sphinx, only this time it's tucked away in a shallow flood basin. During rare periods of low Nile flow, parts of the structure are said to peek through, lion-like haunches, shoulders, and a foundation that seems way too level to be a natural formation. Researchers note that the stoneware isn't random. It follows the contours of the structure, suggesting it was deliberately carved and then, eventually, drowned. Some of the sediment layers here date back to the early Holocene, a time when Egypt was wetter, greener, and prone to massive, landscape-altering floods. If a monument had been carved in that distant era, it could have stood as a beacon for centuries, before finally being swallowed by the mud, forgotten by shifting populations, and buried under the Nile's wandering silt. Skeptics, as always, argue that this is all just a massive coincidence. Natural limestone formations teased into a myth by hopeful eyes. But here's the thing. Water doesn't typically create perfect symmetry. It doesn't carve paws. It doesn't create precisely aligned foundations or accidentally echo the specific geometry of the Great Sphinx just a few miles away. So the question deepens. If water erased this monument from our view, what else has it taken with it? And more urgently, how much of our history still lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for a dry enough season or a bold enough explorer? If this underwater sphinx is truly there, silent, carved, and ancient, why hasn't it been excavated? Why does it remain beneath layers of mud and silence, passed over by archaeologists and ignored by governments? The answer, much like the artifact itself, lies beneath a complicated surface. Egypt's archaeological institutions are incredibly protective, and rightfully so. The nation guards its heritage with rigid protocols and a heavy reliance on academic consensus. Digging up any site, especially one that threatens to set the traditional timeline on fire, requires a mountain of permits, massive funding, and institutional approval. And that approval often rests on one unspoken rule. Do not rewrite Egypt's history without undeniable evidence. This creates a chicken and egg problem. The so-called underwater sphinx has never received an official state-sponsored excavation. Independent researchers and foreign academics have studied the area, but without formal backing, their findings remain anecdotal, suggestive, but never conclusive. Then there's the Nile itself. The river isn't static. It's a living, breathing thing that floods, recedes, and shifts over decades. The site where the monument allegedly rests is flood-prone and submerged for most of the year. Excavating it would be an engineering nightmare, draining the area, rerouting water, and managing structural damage caused by centuries of sediment pressure. It would take decades. There are also the political factors. A discovery this big wouldn't just change textbooks. It would disrupt national narratives and attract a global media frenzy that the authorities might not be ready for. The Ministry of Antiquities generally prefers to promote discoveries that reinforce Egypt's known grandeur, not discoveries that question its foundational history. Some even whisper that certain institutions might already know more than they're letting on, that quiet preliminary studies have happened behind closed doors. But without public records, those claims remain in the realm of conspiracy, and so the monument remains buried. Whether by accident or by design, it sleeps under a blanket of mud and skepticism. It's a strange irony that in a land obsessed with preserving every scrap of its past, one of its greatest mysteries might be hidden in plain sight, unclaimed, unstudied, and untouched by the official record. But nothing stays buried forever. To the ancient Egyptians, the Sphinx was always more than just a sculpture. It was a symbol, part guardian, part god, and part cosmic mystery. With the body of a lion and the head of a man, it represented raw physical strength fused with divine wisdom, power tamed by the royal mind. It was a sentinel placed at the thresholds where the divine met the mortal. The most famous, of course, is the Great Sphinx of Giza. Towering 66 feet high, the Great Sphinx has guarded the plateau for over 4,000 years, facing the rising sun and watching over the eternal tombs of pharaohs. Yet its exact origin remains one of history's most heated debates. While the consensus points to Pharaoh Khafre, others argue it may be far older, a relic whose face was simply recarved over time to match a newer ruler. So what would it actually mean if a second Sphinx, hidden, water-worn, and potentially much older, exists just miles away? It would change everything. No known records speak of twin sphinxes at Giza. The ancient texts are remarkably silent. However, in later Greco-Roman tradition, there are frequent mentions of guardians positioned in balance, flanking sacred spaces. In Egyptian architecture, symmetry isn't just a design choice, it's sacred. Temples almost always feature twin statues, twin obelisks, or twin avenues of lions. Why would the Sphinx be the exception? Some researchers argue that the so-called underwater Sphinx might not be a copy at all, but the original prototype, a pre-dynastic version later replicated on a much grander scale. If this monument predates writing, it isn't bound by a pharaoh's ideology. Its purpose could have been astronomical or ritualistic, perhaps marking an ancient flood or a forgotten god. The lion shape itself is no accident. In ancient Egypt, lions represented the horizon, the gates of dawn and dusk. A sphinx facing east watches the eternal rebirth of the sun. To carve one was to freeze that sacred act in stone. Imagine one carved before the pyramids were even a thought, aligned, guarding, and waiting. It wouldn't just rewrite history, it would redefine the mythos of Egypt itself, casting it not as the beginning of civilization, but as the last echo of something much, much older. As whispers of this submerged mystery echo across the globe, a quiet divide has opened, one that runs deeper than sediment or stone. On one side stands traditional Egyptology, cautious, structured, and rooted in academic consensus. On the other, a growing community of independent researchers and curious minds believe something extraordinary is being overlooked. Mainstream scholars insist on hard evidence, peer-reviewed studies, stratigraphy, and radiocarbon dates. Their concern is fair. Egypt is littered with natural rock formations that happen to look like humans or animals. Misidentifying them can lead to a flood of misinformation. Archaeology must be careful because the past is fragile. It can't be rebuilt once it's broken by careless hands or media hype. But to others, that caution feels like complacency. Independent investigators, many of them engineers or scientists from outside the field, argue that this anomaly deserves a deeper look. They point to high-resolution satellite imagery showing unnatural symmetry, LiDAR scans detecting rectangular foundations beneath the mud, and erosion patterns that seem shaped by design rather than chaos. They also question the political motivations behind the silence. Tourism dollars flow through well-trodden monuments. A new sphinx, especially one that threatens the accepted timeline, could disrupt Egypt's narrative and authority. The fear, they suggest, isn't of fraud, but of having to rewrite everything. Books, documentaries, and podcasts now regularly feature the underwater sphinx. It has become a symbol of hidden history, used as both a rallying cry and a cautionary tale. Supporters call for an open excavation, while detractors warn against pseudoscience. The truth, as always, is lost in the middle, buried beneath voices as thick as the Nile's silt. This divide isn't just academic, it's emotional. It speaks to how we approach our own past. Do we trust only what has been confirmed, or do we follow the hints left just beyond our reach? The underwater Sphinx forces that question into the open. It's not just a rock or a relic. It's a litmus test for how curious we're actually allowed to be. As long as it remains unearthed, both sides will continue to argue above a monument that says nothing, yet might change everything. There's something haunting about a mystery buried in plain sight, especially when it wears the face of a lion and stares up from the mud with ancient silence. The so-called underwater Sphinx near Giza may or may not be real, but its pull is undeniable. It stirs something deep in us, a yearning not just to discover, but to remember. Because the story of a forgotten monument taps into something much older than archaeology, the human sense of loss. We've always lived beside ruins. Cities fall, languages die, and civilizations vanish beneath waves, sand, and ash. We look to the past not just for answers, but for identity. Who were we? How far back do our stories really stretch? And what have we forgotten in our frantic rush toward progress? If the underwater Sphinx is real, if it was carved by hands before recorded history, it becomes more than just a relic. It becomes a voice from a chapter we didn't even know existed. It's a marker from an age when people may have understood the stars differently, honored the earth more intimately, or carried a mythology we can only guess at. Some believe it belongs to an advanced prehistoric culture lost to global catastrophe, a theory often dismissed as fringe. But whether or not that's true, the emotional gravity remains. To imagine a monument carved long before the pyramids, submerged by rising waters, and then erased, is to confront just how fragile civilization truly is. Perhaps that's why the story persists. It reminds us that time is not linear, that empires are temporary, and that even stone can disappear if the river flows long enough. But more importantly, it reminds us that discovery isn't over, that the earth still holds secrets not written in any textbook. In an era defined by instant answers and global data, the underwater Sphinx is a rare thing, an unanswered question, a possibility, a mystery not yet solved by drones or algorithms. Whether it proves to be natural rock or a forgotten monument, it already holds value because it makes us wonder. It makes us wonder if the past is deeper than we thought. Wonder if myth holds memory. Wonder what lies just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to listen. The underwater Sphinx of Giza, whether carved or accidental, confirmed or dismissed, remains where it has always been, beneath the surface, beneath the mud, the water, and the weight of time. It has no plaque, no name, and no spotlight. And yet, it speaks softly in the absence of answers. For every monument we've unearthed in Egypt, there are countless others still buried, still waiting. Some are too fragile to ever uncover. Others are lost to the shifting Nile, drowned beneath layers of silt and secrecy. And a few, like this one, sit in plain view, ignored not because they lack importance, but because they ask questions we're not yet ready to answer. Maybe that's what makes the underwater Sphinx so powerful. It's not its size or its age, but its silence. It forces us to confront the limits of what we know and the discomfort of what we might have overlooked. In truth, it may never be excavated. Politics, funding, and tradition form walls taller than any tomb. But that doesn't mean it's irrelevant. Quite the opposite. The monument's very obscurity has turned it into a mirror, reflecting not just what lies buried, but what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. It also reminds us that history is not a closed book. It's a living puzzle scattered across landscapes and shorelines, waiting for a shift in the tide, a change in thinking, or a brave question to unsettle the dust. Perhaps one day the water will recede and the full form will rise, pause, face, and all. Perhaps radar will finally confirm what myth has long suspected, or perhaps the mystery will remain, passed from generation to generation like a whisper between stones. But whether it's a monument or a mirage, the underwater sphinx already serves its greatest purpose. It stirs the imagination. In a world drowning in certainty, that may be its greatest gift. Because maybe the most ancient things aren't just buried in sand or time. Maybe they're buried in us, in our need to explore, to remember, and to believe that somewhere out there, beneath the waves or the desert, the past still breathes and still waits to be found.